morning to everybody. I'm an architect. I have a PhD in urbanism. Now I'm working for watershed management within the Po Plain as a researcher and also as a landscape architect. So both as a researcher and designer. Today I will talk as a coordinator of a EU-funded project, Life agriCOlture, so a project funded with the EU LIFE program on climate change mitigation. So the research I discussed today builds on the extensive and interdisciplinary activity of description and physical transformation realized on a group of 15 mountain dairy farms located in the Emilian Apennines in the northern of Italy within this EU-funded project. So by working on a paradigmatic case study of soil threat, the project investigates the contribution that animal husbandry can play in mountain areas for soil protection and climate change mitigation. Today I will discuss the results produced in the first 2 years of activity of the project by zooming on some of the demo farms that we are working with, and analytically by stressing the notion of scale. So it's also an attempt of finding a new way of talking about this project today for me. So this is the structure of today's presentation and also the structure of the research that I actually built using this raw material, this let's say body of research that was available today with the project. So first of all, I will let's say construct a point of entry for you for understanding a bit better the analytical and also design activity that we are bringing forward with the project by outlining a brief environmental history of the processes of modernization that affected agriculture in Emilian Apennines and also its landscape configurations. The second part is dedicated to read and reconceptualize the relevant and diverse rescaling processes that affected dairy farms in this mountain territory by stressing their capacity of producing specific and complex ecologies and physical and social geographies. So I will try now to read rescaling processes also as a driver of let's say territorial production of complexity, also ecological complexity and social complexity. Third part reads the demonstration activity carried out by the project as an attempt to valorize the weakness, what at least I would try to argue as a weakness, of the rationalization processes that historically affected this agricultural landscape, and on the other side, to strengthen the complexity produced on it by the upscaling processes that have transformed its property structure. So the conclusion will go back to the methodology of action research assumed by the project, in which landscape transformations goes together with the construction of a shared language and imaginary between farmers, technicians, and researchers coming from different fields. So let's start with a brief history of the modernization processes that affected the Emilian Apennines. So till the 50s, this territory, at least till let's say the 600 meters above sea level, was dominated by agroforestry system, specially organized as a matrix of closed fields of small dimensions, frequently embanked and bordered with hedges, A landscape and an agrarian system deeply adapted to the fragile conditions of the Apennines soil and to the structural condition of organic matter deficit. Okay, so there were really few cows to the 50s here. And today, this is the place where Parmigiano Reggiano is produced. So there was a big shift. Yes, a big shift that was be possible, no, through the introduction of alfalfa meadows. That is quite recent, no, can be dated, no, since the 50s. That's allowed to have say specialization on grassland, on forest production in a territory that from a climatic point of view wouldn't be suitable, no, for forest production because there's really scarce rainfall in summertime. So the construction of let's say in the entire Po plain, actually the construction of specialized forest production is actually artificial. In the valley, in the Po Valley, was realized through, let's say, the construction of maybe the biggest, no, artificial irrigation in Europe, and it was realized since the 15th century at least. In the Apennines, this process, the same in the northern part of the Apennines, this introduction, no, so actually the agricultural revolution arrived much later. For agricultural revolution, we intend, you know, the introduction of cows in, let's say, farming cycles, no? Rotations. So, why did I talk weak modernization? No? Since, no, I mean, the agroforestry landscape was actually totally erased by this transformation, and I mean, the big land merges realized that produced, no, soil threat and produced produce a condition of hydrogeological risk. I talk about weak modernization because actually, probably, especially, you know, because of the farm size that we'll see later, this modernization could not be so, let's say, capillary. And we have wide areas where this modernization hasn't come, where they, let's say, appears as marginal from a productive point of view, but still construct, I mean, this overlapping of, let's say, arable lands that went through strong rationalization process, permanent meadows, marginal conditions in pastures, you know, this overlapping of structural conditions create interesting landscapes and also interesting farm structures, because the same farm can have these three conditions, you know, overlapped in its let's say extended shape. So yes, an interesting. So we said that modernization produced in his let's say not capillarity condition of interest, but produced also soil threats. That is also the starting point of our project. No, it was financed exactly, no, for dealing with the soil threats. So the let's say losing of soil for erosion, the losing of carbon in the soil, the issues linked with let's say, the strong presence of stones on the soil that really is a big limit to agricultural practice. So this was the starting point of the project. A condition, an interesting condition, structural condition, landscape condition, but also environmental issues concerning soil. So I was telling that modernization produced a wide variety of farm structures and property structures. We see the 15 demo farms that are involved in the project. We see a common condition, the exploded dimension. I mean, it was beside one condition, that is this one that we see later. All the other farms have this, I mean, almost irrational. I mean, it appears irrational form, but actually has strong rationalities. No, this is the point that I would like to stress. No, this shape has strong rationalities, and people that constructed them were really conscious of what they were doing. No? So today we'll quickly take a look on these 6 case studies that I mean cross a variety also of scales. So these 5 farms that are placed along this valley, and another one there. These are okay. It's interesting to stress a thing concerning these case studies. They are all family-based dairy farms, many of them coming from sharecropping families. So they are first generation after sharecropping. Huge change because I mean their father used to manage 5 hectares. Now they manage 100, 200 hectares. Still keeping let's say a family-based running management with really few employees, really few. So with a strong capacity, strong projection, capacity of projection with mechanization. That is mainly managed by them. You know, they have no workers that do mechanization. They don't trust them. The workers in the stables for, let's say, taking care of cows, but the countryside is made by really few people. Okay, so I tried to give some titles to the case studies that I picked to focus on some issues. So, and also to let's say put them in couples that produce some knowledge, their confrontation. So polycentric family, this is Enea Giavelli, that has 2 sons, actually 3 sons, but one is girl that is not involved in the family. So polycentric family because polycentric farm because it's organized on 3 let's say cores, each one corresponding to an estate, agricultural estate, and with a house. So since it's a multi-generational house, each son has his own family and his own house, and they were able to let's say realizing this upscaling, linking the acquiring of a house and acquiring of podere, of estates around. So let's say trying to concentrate the estate around the houses with the previous logic of the sharecropping society that was exactly based on this strict and close relation between house and countryside. They tried to reproduce it, although with a difference. Okay, this is the historical landscape. You see what I was telling to you, the agroforestry system called piantata. That is just an intercropping system between arable lands and trees supporting vineyards.
This is the stable with the house, the main house. It is totally new. Was built because the original house was given to a son, so they just the father moved to another place, building a new housing, a new farm core there, acquiring other. Oh, okay, we have to go fast. Okay, so this was a compact one I was telling you about, really particular condition that was realized just by chance because it was possible to acquire all the land around that, but it's really a unique condition also because it's probably the biggest farm in this territory, really big one with more also headquarters. Then two smaller farms. I go really quick. This one, this is Damiano, is a guy that just joined his father in conducting the farm. So they're also looking for the right size of the farm. They acquired from some parents this podere, this big podere that is quite compact, and now they are putting a lot of efforts there. This is the stable that is rented. They don't even have their own stable. This is an even smaller one. It just really, although the age, it just started doing this activity and is looking for the right size. You know, it's really interesting. I don't have time to tell you, the rationalities that are moving in acquiring some land. It's never by chance. Huh? Sometimes they tell him that there's an available piece of land, but I mean, and he buys it, but he do that with a logic. Okay, so farming with no land. This guy has just no land, and he takes his sheep on let's say all this territory. He can go wherever he wants on this territory just by waiting the first cut of the grass. Then they cannot realize the second cut because it's marginal territory. So he can take his sheep wherever. So this is a particular condition. This is another particular condition. Is a co-op that realized land merges, putting together common land, common forest land also, and also acquiring an old stable that used to be a cows co-op, a dairy cows co-op that failed. And now with this new, let's say, also entrepreneurial project of constructing a community co-op, providing more services to the community, is working fine. And also people is really willing to give their land to them for sheep. Okay. So the prototypes. I said that our demonstration activity tried to valorize the complexity and diversity of these farm structures and these landscapes. So I would like to talk about what we did as an assistance to the agro-system evolution. We try to construct the knowledges, and also the language, a shared language with the farmers, to really understand how to assist the agro-ecosystem evolutions of these grassland. So, for example, where we have this condition more, let's say, rationalized of arable land with alfalfa and cereal rotation, trying to think a longer cycle for them compared to the 3 years common cycle of the alfalfa meadow. That here is just not affordable because tillaging every 3 years is just crazy. You see the amount of stones that you take off the ground every time you tillage. So really a way of managing after the first years of the implantation of the meadow, of the alfalfa meadow, the
strategic interventions to make the life cycle of this method as long as possible. And it's possible with the conservation agriculture techniques. It's quite feasible today. Where we have permanent meadows with let's say biodiversity quality, it's a pity not to reverse it to bring back to arable land. We try to maintain them with a kind of similar knowledge. Okay, let's go first just to see some interventions. I do not have time to comment it. This is what we found at the beginning. I didn't say anything about the rest. No, I didn't put the slide. No, together with the let's say agronomic activity, we also work on the infrastructure, on the structure, realizing let's say amelioration work. In every intervention, every prototype has also an amelioration work. We work on the mobility, secondary mobility, so the accessibility. We work on drainages. Many times we work on selective cuttings. So this was really important to share what we meant for selecting cuttings with the farmers. This is a work of stone removal. Where here you see big stones that were removed, to allow the sod cedar to enter this field. These are the stones that we removed from the field. And this is the sod cedar. The clover, yes, a mix of clover, Lolium multiflorum, etc., etc. This is the work on pastures. Again, yes, here we can see the infrastructure that we realized really easy. We made the farms building them by themselves. This is an anti-wolf forest fence within the forest. Sod seeding realized with broadcasting technique. This is the mixing of seeds that we realized. Here, so just this is a demonstration field that was at the end of its life cycle. We took it, we renovated by having 2 years of herbages, and now this summer we'll turn back to alfalfa meadow with entering this long cycle through sod seeding on the crop. Again, some amelioration work on the mobility. Bit too strong, but okay. I close it here. I put my conclusion already in the presentation, so I don't go further. Thank you.
We would have loved to see more. I'm sorry, dude.
I'm sorry.
Bad cop job here of cutting you all off. Anyway, we have 5 minutes at least for questions. Can I get the first or to ask the first question?
Yes, I have one for Maureen.
She's here.
Okay. I was just being very curious because when you described your data collection method with the 30 interviews, you wrote on the slide that you did handwriting instead of recording.
Yeah.
And I just became very curious to hear your reflections on that method.
I like time. Thank you. No, actually, with the farmers, I got really precautionous because I knew that they were having a bad relation with the state representatives, who the intercommunality is. So I went to them by the research cap first, and then I chose not to even propose to record because that was for me a proof of trust. Like you will see me writing, you can watch my paper every time you need it, and this is what I write here is what I will keep in mind. Like okay, sometimes I keep other things in mind because they tell me not to write, but this was the initiative of trust I wanted to create. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Yes.
Peter.
I would have a question to Kian and Anders. You talked about the importance of the intersection with social exchange, but you developed mostly the financial part of the question of zero lease. Could you tell a bit more about that? Because this is an external, what we call in economics an externality. And externalities are predominant in rural space. I think in Kenya there are about 70% of human activity are externalities, so that's quite an interesting question. So it seems to me that this intersection with social exchange is like the most important thing, the most important value. Can you say something more about that?
I think the quick answer is that we don't have had time to do that part of the study deeply enough to tell you so much. So it's most by coincidence we have understood some examples. But I think you're completely right. But what we have figured out is that it is very often, as I mentioned also, that land which families own, but they don't want to abandon. So they want to hand it over in the neighborhood to someone who can use it. And it's very often including some kind of you do this for me and I reply in some other ways. But I think it's rather tricky to get deeply into this. And as I said, we need to do more on that topic. But I think this is, you need to remember that no one has seen this phenomena at all before we find it and start looking into the statistics. I think we're opening the box, so to say.
Yeah, that's what's so fantastic about it.
Yeah, I think, and it's also...
So it's a production of commons, but
it
to
is.
me that is nice.
It is. Yeah,
and to that extent, it's very interesting too.
Yeah, I want to add a bit. Yeah. So I mean, because it's the beginning of the project, we have the ambition to do more qualitative studies because this is a quantitative part, which thanks to Swedish data, we can have such a statistical picture and see the patterns. And so I think based on that, we will map more where we start to do the qualitative part. Because for me, I think we can draw and learn a lot from those studies in the global south, where it's about this social relation. It's a reciprocal relations. That's fundamental, and that's all how you make the rural lives. Like, so I think that's a long-term kind of plan for sure. We need to look into that.
Maybe I have one reflection more. I have actually rent out land on zero lease myself. And the reason was that I bought a small cottage together with my family and it was 2 hectares. And after one summer, I realized that 2 hectares is too much to handle with the grass mower. It was completely impossible. And then a neighbor came and said, but couldn't I have my horses here? Oh, wow, thanks for that. And then it was no other, it was just this helping each other. But I agree
But
with
the subsidy also plays a role.
Yeah, we
haven't
didn't
figured out. When I think it's also because of data, they changed what question they asked over time. You know, this data has been for 20 years, right? They changed their methods, questions, and so on. And some they report to EU, some only at the Swedish level, and they actually add this question more and more about the role of the subsidy in influencing people if what price you rent out or if you applied for a subsidy related to such zero lease land or not. So, so I think we can probably learn more from statistics later.
Keith has the next question.
Yeah, well, actually, kind of. But just to reflect the resonance of the last point, I was going to ask more or less exactly the same question that Peter asked about the cultural and social resonance of this free lease thing. So, yeah.
Okay, so your question is answered. Then we have a question.
Kind of just shortly following up on that, I'm curious to the extent of how the soil value in itself, the soil condition, reflects the character of this exchange of land.
I think, as I mentioned earlier, and that was why I figured out
Yeah,
I
the
need to
map.
give you a context. Because from the south of Sweden, which is similar to Denmark, to the
Yeah.
north, we talk about the distance of a very good soil, extremely productive, to the Sami reindeer,
Yeah.
poor soil. But there is another interesting, maybe historical explanation for that, is that the frontier in expanding agricultural land in Sweden actually stopped in between the First and Second World War. And it was moving upwards and inland. So it is, of course, bad soils in the north. And the season is also very short.
Yeah.
So, of course, that is one reason why you find all this zero lease in the north.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you can think about, which Kjell and I have discussed, that you do investments in land. So you have some kind of land as your capital when you have cleared it up, you take all the stones away, and then that has some kind of value, which I think is reflected in these social cultural relations, that someone who owns land doesn't want it to become overgrown or completely abandon it,
Yeah.
especially when it's
Yeah.
close to the farmstead or the houses.
So I'm just thinking, actually, exactly what you're saying there. I think proves to the point that making maybe the distinction between saying it's not the economic, it's the social ecological. Maybe it's both, and maybe that doesn't exclude each other. Maybe it's not in opposition to each other. That those things are connected in those lands exchanges.
Yeah, but another thing is that, of course, but there is no money transfer. Also,
Yeah.
there is nothing involved in that.
Yeah.
And that, I think that is, but on the other hand, it's also very often very local. It's always local. And you saw that example where they had one small zero lease in the bottom of the agriculture plain in the forest. That's the one reason is that there is no other fields around. So you cannot add it to something. And farmers don't like to drive 30 kilometers to one field, which is half a hectare in the forest.
Yeah.
That is impossible. So there you have the economic logic behind it, which I think we have tried to figure out first. We need to figure out that to understand why do we find it here and not there.
Yeah.
There is a spatial...
Sorry, I didn't want to cut you, but I do think that there actually was a link where in your case, Luca, the zero land farmer came into play. And maybe you can tell us just a bit more, because you scrambled for time, about how that works, how that guy knows when he can let his sheep onto whose land, and how that is coordinated.
Thank you. Yeah, just by, let's say, community agreement. No? They know everything in the valley. They are the really few farms with sheep, and so they have a monopoly of that, of the second cut. No, let's say the grass, because the second cut is not done. There are really few also cows farms there, so the intensity is much lower in that precise place, and they can run a farm like that.
And the coordination is informal, or is it, how is it?
It's informal. It's informal.
So they just know.
Actually, for
when,
doing the demo plot, we had to ask him to formalize some informal agreements because he didn't have 2.5 hectares to give to the project.
Of course, when you formalize it, you can tax it, so that's a danger.
Yeah.
Yes, but then the person who owns it loses the contribution, the EU contribution. So so there's people having EU contribution without doing agriculture, so doing farming actually, just owning. That's quite diffuse, I think.
I think that's our time.
Thank you so much.